Welcome to Simmons Says, where I help emerging and struggling writers create intriguing plots and compelling characters to make their stories hard to put down and even harder to forget. Hey, hello there. I'm Alex Simmons, and welcome to another Simmons Says, where we figure out what happens next in your stories. Got a good question for you. How do you regain creative momentum? How do you get the engine flowing, get the juices going when you need to? When you sit down to the keyboards, you sit down to that pad and pen and are expected to produce. How do you do that? That's what I'm going to help you do in this particular session. And I'm going to do that not only by sharing a little bit of my own experience, but the thoughts of several well-known writers. Because guess what? We all go through it. We all face it. It is the norm. That's right. I'll give you my, for instance, first. And, I've been writing for many years. And even prior to that, I was an actor and I still roam around that range a bit. But the bottom line was there was always a point in my young adult and adult life where creativity was required, sometimes on command at a particular time. And maybe that day something happened that put me in a down mood or down place. Maybe that day I was exhausted, hadn't slept enough, hadn't done this, hadn't done that. But when I hit the stage, when I stepped in front of the camera, when I stepped in front of the audience for whatever the reason, presentation, whatever, I was expected to be on 100%, know my lines or have my presentation ready, be able to speak and pull from me the enthusiasm and energy that was necessary to get the lines, the character, or the point across. And there are different ways that you deal with that, and sometimes not as effectively as you might want, but still you need to pull it out. So, in one particular case, and I think I've talked about this on the show before, occasionally I run into an assignment that for some bizarre reason just doesn't flow, just doesn't want to come out. Even if it's something that I'm interested in, something that I enjoy, something that I've written about before, for some reason, it's stuck. It's pulling teeth. It's, as I like to say, digging through a coal mine with a nail file. And there's certain routines and things that I lean on. But one of the things I lean on is, and this was a hard taught lesson, is that if there's a deadline and if people are depending on me, then I have to proceed. I have to allow myself to put words on paper. And I also have to understand that quite often those words are going to be trash. That's your first draft. Yeah, I've talked about that before. So sometimes the thing that holds us back, the thing that we feel like our energy tank or our creative tank is empty, it's not so much that it's empty. It's not that we don't have thoughts in our heads. It's that we're looking for that perfect moment. And we've talked about perfect. Or we're not quite sure how it's going to sound, how it's going to be, whether or not it's going to come together completely. And so we hold back. And the more we hold back, the more time we lose. But also, the more some little voices in our head begin to whisper, maybe it's not coming at all. So your first thing is giving yourself permission to put that material out there and let it happen. Um, Now, before I bring more of my philosophy in here, let me reach into the words of some, as I said before, some noted authors. I often refer to Stephen King, Maya Angelou, and a few others, and I'm going to do it again. But I'm going to give you one before that, before Stephen and before Maya. I'm going to talk about Cormac McCarthy. Cormac McCarthy has written a number of dark and sometimes disturbing material, very heavy material, very bare bones material, but very impactful material. One of his more well-known pieces that you might have heard of is No Country for Old Men. And yes, if you've seen the movie, that doesn't mean you've read the book. But if you read the book, then you know what I'm talking about. But again, McCarthy says that, and he's known to be a rather reclusive man, somebody who, sort of doesn't get out there and mingle a lot with people. But he says writing is very subconscious. And the last thing I want to do is think about it. Right? So his daily practice, he rises at 6, he works through the morning, every morning, 7 days a week. So his routine is to get up at a particular time and to start doing the work, start doing the writing. And he will write for a particular period of time, 7 days a week. That's his regiment. That's his habit. He knows that getting up and sitting down at the desk or the table, wherever he's going to place himself with whatever tools he's going to use to write, that's his job, to get up and do that. And then what comes out, right? He says, things I've written about are no longer of any interest to me, but they were certainly of interest before I wrote about them. So again, he writes about things that are important to him or interesting to him or intriguing to him. And he gets it all out there and he refines it in his own style, in his own way. And once he has put it out there, he lets it go and turns to find the next interesting subject or topic that he wants to write about. And again, starts his routine. Up every morning, certain time, starts writing, finishes at a certain time, 7 days a week. So that's Mr. McCarthy. Let's go back to Maya Angelou. I have a couple of quotes here. I have notes, see, because as I said, I want to share with you other people's opinions about this, and then I'll come back to my own. Maya says that, she's had her own ritual too, right? She would rent a hotel room and have them take down anything that's decorative and distracting in the room, right? Just remove it. She's Maya Angelou, right? Respectfully, she's not being a diva, but she wants the distractions removed. She would bring in certain items with her, specific items of her own. They would be the Bible. There would be some writings by Paul Laurence Dunbar and by James Weldon Johnson, and a deck of cards. And she would sit with, again, whatever tools she's going to write with, and that would be her routine. No exterior distractions. A few items that she could go to for inspiration, stimulation, or to while away a certain amount of time while her mind, her brain processed what she's working on. She often, as it says here, referred to the big mind and the little mind. The little mind would work through crossword puzzles and play solitaire. Again, those little distraction areas, those moments of, okay, step back from, do something else. There's some writers who will go clean the house, or some writers who will mow the lawn, some writers who will take long walks, whatever. You do something else while another part of your mind, in her case, she would call it the big mind, is doing the work, is processing, is going through the story, is working out little snags and plot twists and character development and dialogue or monologues, right? And at a certain point, she would be ready to again sit down and continue writing. So you allow yourself a certain amount of time to do other things, to experience other things, while another part of your mind is working on the story. But then the promise is that you would go back and sit down and put that on paper. If you give yourself 2, 3, 4 hours a day to write, 1 hour a day to write, know that you give yourself that hour, that amount of time, and you keep that promise to yourself. So let me go with Stephen King now, right? He was asked by George R. R. Martin at one point, says, what does he do when the story's stuck, when, he's blocked, right? It's constipated, I believe was the phrase he used. And King said that he wouldn't keep pushing, he wouldn't keep ramming against it. Said that he would sit back and take a look at the story from a different angle, right? Look at the dialogue, look at whatever from a different perspective. So the characters would tell him where he went wrong. So his approach was, okay, if I'm pushing and it's not working, then maybe I'm writing the plot. And those are my words, not his. That maybe he's writing to the situation, or maybe he's trying to twist the situation or twist the characters in a direction that they really organically don't want to go. And so what he's doing is he's allowing himself a moment to sit back, listen, or respond to, or run the story through his head. And then what would the characters do? What would the characters say to him? Because again, you can write or you can outline a plot, But once you start pushing the characters to do whatever you feel has to be done to stay true to that plot, you begin to ignore the authenticity of the characters. How you, as a writer, might want to manipulate your characters through a story may not be organic to the type of characters you're writing about. And so at some point, if you've done your homework, your characters begin to give you that sense of, I wouldn't do it this way. I wouldn't say that. And if you keep trying to ignore that, then you find yourself in a jam. You find yourself in a muddy, compressed, dark place with the story. It doesn't want to move. It doesn't feel right because you're not really letting the story help you figure out where it has to go in order to, yes, address your plot, but address your plot in a more authentic, organic way so that it really has solid structure. It really makes sense. The characters move in ways that your audience can connect to and identify with and empathize with. Sometimes, if we push against that authenticity, we lose momentum, we lose our way. Now, there are other writers that I could refer to, like Toni Morrison or George R. R. Martin, who all have their own particular technique for dealing with this. But it seems like a general consensus is each person has found his or her own way to address what happens when they feel like they've lost the momentum, the drive, that energy that's taking through the stories if the story's just flowing. They step back, they give themselves space, they stick to a routine that allows them to just write at a certain time every day and don't worry about whether or not the words are precious jewels now. They write, they get it out of them, and because they know they can always come back and revise and review and revise and make it much better. I like to pretty much say that for me, creativity is something that just is. Whether or not we can access it when we want to every time is something else, but it's there. As a child, I played with my toys and I made up all kinds of stories and fantastic voyages and things like that. And I traveled in my mind to places I'd never been. Maybe I read a little about them or I saw them in a movie or television show or whatever, but I had no full experience of that. And yet, in my imagination and in my play, I could go anywhere from the Wild Wild West to deepest regions of outer space. Through time, I could travel, all of those things. And I could experience love and hate and anger and excitement because I just allowed myself. I was not burdened with the what if someone sees me, what if people think I'm nuts, what if, and believe me, people did. But in my play, especially as an only child, in my play, I was free and creativity and imagination flowed freely. And as I got older, I didn't lock off from that as much. I mean, yes, you become a teenager and a young adult, and maybe you have some peer pressure and you're worried about this and how that. Maybe your parents have said, get a real job or get serious or whatever. All of that, yeah. And maybe you do close off. I didn't, not as much. And because I didn't, the access was still there a lot more easily for me than for some others that I knew. Give yourself permission to play with your work. I know some of you are writing very serious, dark, tragic, intense pieces. Fine. But bear with me. The more you tense up, the more you twist and fold into that intensity, in many cases, the more you block off, you lock off. If you can open yourself up to the excitement and the enthusiasm and the passion of the work, even when the phrases aren't coming the way you want them to, there's still something that will come out. There's still words and thoughts and phrases and actions that you can put down, even if reading them looks painful. You put them down because you're telling yourself, I can come back to this later. I can make this better. And if you don't believe you can make this better, that's a lie because you can. With or without help, you can. But you got to give yourself permission to do that. And again, if the momentum isn't as intense one day as it was the other, then fine. Lock in on routines. No matter what, how you feel, every day, sit down and write for a specific period of time. 20 minutes, half an hour, more if you want. Sometimes just getting it started and you suddenly find yourself in a flow and you can just go with that. The real enemy is if in feeling, oh boy, I don't know, it's just not there. If in feeling that, you then become convinced that's going to be permanent. It's not unless you let it. But if you can say to yourself, okay, here's where I am now, but I got to spend my 20, I got to spend my 30 minutes. I'm going to just write stream of consciousness or whatever. I'll read a little something and then I'll go back and I'll write about that. I'll write about what I just read. I'll write about what I just saw, just to write. And as the writing happens, if you get an inspiration that locks into your story or connects to your story, write that down. Don't worry about, oh, well, I'm not in that chapter. Don't worry about it. Just put it down. And you begin to build up that momentum again because you'll find this little snatch of dialogue, this little bit of description, this little bit of stream of consciousness that will fit in and you can start to thread them together. There are very academic, meticulous, regimented ways of approaching this challenge as well. Many of those are not my way. Many of those are not the way of some of the people that I follow. But your job is to find what works best for you. And this is what I'm suggesting in this particular case. Okay, that was it for this session of Simmons Says. So be with us next time when I will once again strive to help you find out what happens next in your story. Take care.